It didn't look like a weapon. It was a box, wood and gold, carried on poles by priests in white linen. It had no army around it, no fortress above it, no visible power that anyone could point to and say there. That is what makes it dangerous. And yet walls fell when it passed. Armies dissolved. A man touched it once, just once, and dropped dead before he hit the ground. Nations that captured it begged to return it. Cities that housed it were struck with plague until their people wept in the streets. Even the priests who carried it were not permitted to look at it directly. This was the Ark of the Covenant, and for thousands of years the most powerful object in human history has been missing. Where did it go? What was it, really? And why, after all this time, has no one been able to find it? Everything begins in fire. Moses had been on the mountain for 40 days. Below him, the camp of Israel stretched across the desert floor, 2 million people, restless, uncertain, waiting for a man who had walked into a cloud and not come back. Above him, something else entirely. The air at the summit did not feel like air. It vibrated. It pressed against him. The cloud covering the mountain was not just weather. It was presence, dense, alive, aware. And then the voice came. Not loud, not distant, close. The way a voice sounds when someone is standing directly beside you in a dark room. Moses, my people need my presence among them. I will dwell with them. Build me a sanctuary exactly as I show you. Before Moses, an image formed in the trembling light. A tabernacle sacred, precise, every measurement deliberate. And at its center, suspended in golden light, something that stopped his breath. The ark, pure acacia wood, overlaid entirely in gold, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 wide. At its top, a mercy seat of solid gold, flanked by 2 cherubim whose wings arched inward, facing each other, facing down. There, the voice said, I will meet with you. There I will speak. There I will make my covenant known. Moses memorized every detail, every measurement, every material, every curve of the cherubim wings. He understood without being told that this was not a religious object. It was not decoration. It was not symbolic. It was a throne. When Moses descended and described what he had seen, the camp fell silent. Bezalel and Aholiab were called forward. 2 craftsmen chosen, the scripture says, and filled with the Spirit of God, not just with skill, but with something that moved their hands from somewhere beyond themselves. They began to work. Gold was melted. Acacia wood was shaped. The cherubim were carved with a precision that made other craftsmen stop and stare. There was something in the forms, something in the way the wings curved that felt less like craftsmanship and more like memory, as though the hands that made them had seen the original. Weeks passed, then months. When the ark was finally complete and placed inside the Holy of Holies, Moses stood at the entrance and looked in. The ark shimmered in the low light, still, waiting. Then the cloud moved. The same cloud that had guided Israel out of Egypt descended, slowly, deliberately. It settled over the tabernacle, and the light inside it pulsed once, then filled everything. The ground shook. Men fell to their knees without deciding to. Women covered their faces. Children wept without knowing why. Aaron, standing beside his brother, whispered, "The Lord has come down." That was the moment Israel understood what they were carrying. The ark moved with the nation. Whenever the cloud lifted, the priests dismantled the camp, wrapped the ark in layers of cloth blue, scarlet, and a final covering of skin, and the Levites bore it on their shoulders. Never on a cart, never dragged, carried, always carried. The rules around it were absolute. No one could touch it. No one could look at it uncovered. The Levites who bore it were not permitted to look down at what they carried. Even the chosen, were not allowed direct contact. When Israel reached the Jordan River at flood stage, the priests stepped into the water first, carrying the ark. The current stopped. The water piled up miles upstream, rising in a visible wall while the entire nation crossed on dry ground. 2 million people, livestock, carts, children. All of them walked across the bed of a river that was still standing, frozen at attention. When the last person crossed, The priests stepped out, and the Jordan roared back into place behind them. Jericho was next, a walled city, reinforced, ancient, its gates shut, its soldiers watching from above. The strategy God gave Joshua made no military sense. March around the city, once a day, for 6 days, say nothing, carry the ark. On the 7th day march 7 times, then shout. That was the plan. The soldiers of Jericho watched from the walls. They laughed at first, then they went quiet. There was something about the procession, the silence of it, the steadiness that made men uncomfortable in a way they couldn't explain. On the 7th day, Israel marched 7 times around the city. Then Joshua raised his hand. The shout that came up from 2 million throats was not like any battle cry ever heard. It was not rage. It was not desperation. It was release, the sound of a people who had waited 40 years in a desert for this single moment. The walls of Jericho didn't crack. They didn't crumble slowly. They fell flat, all of them, at once, as though the ground beneath them had simply decided to let go. But the ark was not a charm. Israel learned this the hard way. After Jericho, a man named Achan hid plunder that God had forbidden. No one knew. The camp celebrated. And then Israel marched against the small city of Ai and was routed, 36 men dead. The army fled in panic. Joshua fell on his face before the ark and cried out, "Why? Why did you let this happen?" The answer was immediate. Sin in the camp, hidden, unconfessed. The ark did not fight for a people who carried corruption in secret. The presence of God was not a guarantee of protection. It was a mirror, and what it reflected back at Ai was a nation that had broken faith. Achan was found, judgment came, and then the ark moved forward again. Years later, the Philistines captured it. It was one of the darkest moments in Israel's history, not because of the military loss, but because of what it meant. The ark, the throne of God, carried away on a Philistine cart to the temple of their god, Dagon. That night, the statue of Dagon fell face down before the ark. The priests set it back up. The next morning, Dagon had fallen again, this time with his head and both hands broken off at the threshold. Only the stump remained. The priests of Dagon didn't have a category for that. Then the plagues came. The city of Ashdod was struck first. Tumors, sickness spreading house to house. The Philistines moved the ark to Gath. Gath was struck. They moved it to Ekron. Ekron erupted in panic before it even arrived. 7 months. For 7 months the Philistines kept the ark, and for 7 months they suffered. Finally their priests delivered their verdict with the kind of certainty that only comes from prolonged suffering. Send it back. Send it back with a guilt offering. You know what happened to Egypt. They built a new cart. They placed the ark on it with offerings of gold, 5 golden tumors, 5 golden rats, 1 for each Philistine city that had suffered. They hitched 2 milk cows to the cart cows that had never been yoked, cows whose calves were locked away so that every natural instinct would pull them home. The cows walked straight toward Israel, without hesitating, without turning, lowing as they went, as though mourning something, but never stopping. The Philistines followed at a distance and watched until the cart disappeared over the border. The ark returned to Israel, but the story was not over. At Beth Shemesh, the men who received it made a fatal error. Curiosity overrode reverence. They looked inside. 70 men died. The survivors sent word, "The ark of the Lord is here. Come and take it. We cannot bear to have it with us." It sat in the house of Abinadab on a hill for 20 years, watched over by his son Eleazar, who had been consecrated specifically for that purpose. 20 years of silence, 20 years of waiting. Then David became king. David wanted the ark in Jerusalem. He wanted the presence of God at the center of his kingdom, not sitting forgotten on a hill in someone's house. His intentions were right, his method was not. They loaded the ark onto a cart, the same mistake the Philistines had made, and began the journey to Jerusalem with music and celebration. Then the oxen stumbled. A man named Uzzah reached out instinctively to steady the ark. He touched it. He died immediately, on the spot, before the music stopped. David was not angry at God. He was terrified. He asked the question that every person who has ever stood before something genuinely holy has had to ask: who is adequate for this? Who can come near? He left the ark at the house of Obed-Edom. For 3 months, everything Obed-Edom had was blessed: his household, his fields, his family. Word reached David, and he understood. The ark was not dangerous because God was cruel. It was dangerous because holiness is not casual. Proximity to something that pure requires preparation that most people have never made. David brought the ark to Jerusalem the right way, on the shoulders of consecrated Levites, with sacrifices every 6 steps. With David himself dancing before it in linen, stripped of his royal robes, undignified, unashamed. His wife Michal watched from a window and despised him for it. He didn't stop. The ark rested in Jerusalem. David built a tent for it. His son Solomon eventually built the temple, that vast and golden house, and the ark was placed in the Holy of Holies, beneath the wings of 2 enormous carved cherubim, where it rested in total darkness. And then, silence. The ark appears in the historical record, referenced, mentioned, present, and then, somewhere between the reign of the last faithful kings and the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC, it vanishes. No capture, no destruction, no burial record. It simply disappears. Theories have filled the silence for 2,000 years. Some say Jeremiah hid it in a cave on Mount Nebo before the Babylonians arrived, sealed it away, and told no one the location. The Book of Maccabees records this tradition that the prophet took the ark and the altar of incense to the mountain where Moses had gone to see the promised land, hid them in a cave, stopped up the entrance, and said this place will remain unknown until God gathers his people together again. Others say it was taken to Ethiopia during the reign of Solomon, carried south by Menelik, the son Solomon never fully claimed, and that it rests today inside a small chapel in Aksum, guarded by a single monk who is never allowed to leave, who spends his entire life watching over something the rest of the world has spent centuries searching for. Others say it was never lost at all, that it was hidden beneath the Temple Mount itself, sealed in a chamber that has never been excavated, waiting in the darkness under Jerusalem, exactly where it has always been. No one knows. But here is what we do know. The ark was never just an object. From the moment Moses descended from Sinai with its measurements burned into his memory, it was something else. It was the point where heaven touched earth. The place where the invisible became not visible exactly, but present, felt, real in a way that made grown men fall to the ground without choosing to. And the lesson it left behind, written in fallen walls and stopped rivers and dead men who reached out without thinking, is the same lesson every encounter with genuine holiness produces. You do not approach it casually. You do not carry it on a cart because it is convenient. You do not touch it because you are close to it and it seems about to fall. Reverence is not a feeling. It is a posture, a decision made before you ever get close enough to reach out your hand. The ark is gone, or hidden, or waiting. But the question it asks has never stopped. What do you do when you are standing in the presence of something too holy to touch?